We completed the first 2 chapters of Nahum the last time we met. And chapter 2 opened with the vision of a sentinel bringing a message of good news to the people of Judah. And in Nahum's time, if centuries later, such an image would have been in the minds of the Judeans as a messenger sent from an Israelite army general to tell the people of Jerusalem and Judah that Israel had won the battle. Only much later did this message change from being one of deliverance from a foreign invader or an oppressor to the coming of a spiritual savior. Now, part of the good news that was brought was that with the defeat of Assyria will come a full and uninterrupted resumption of the Shabbat, the biblical feasts and appointed times, sacrificing, and even the submission of vow offerings. The book of Ezekiel tells modern times God worshipers that once Yeshua returns, this is going to happen again. And in quite detailed language in the final 8 chapters of his book. To end chapter 2, an oracle of God to Nahum makes it clear that Assyria's demise will be total and final. The Assyrian Empire will never rise again. And within this judgment is also the message that the cause of God's harsh judgment on Assyria is twofold. First, Assyria was brutal, violent, used its power to take whatever it wanted, had no fear of the God of Israel. And second, they oppressed Israel, using that violent brutality against them. Even after sending the prophet Jonah any decades earlier to offer them a chance to repent, which they did for a short time. Nineveh had returned to their brutality against the Israelites. And what we also see is that when God ordained against Assyria, what he ordained against Assyria was a rule, it was a pattern for all nations who did the same as Assyria. Even if that Assyria-like nation was not a direct oppressor of Israel, God would still judge them for it. But if they were an oppressor of Israel in that same brutality, then the judgment would be even more harsh and final. Bottom line, the nations that have continually brutalized and attacked Israel since their rebirth as a nation in 1948 are going to be decimated by YHVH. And without doubt, as I present this lesson, Iran is the chief brutalist over Israel and has been for decades. Their fate, now or later, will be horrendous. And as we move on to Nahum chapter 3, this is the longest chapter of this short book. Nahum sort of reframes and summarizes what's going to happen to Assyria, both the reasons for it and what it's going to result in. It is again reiterated that God's wrath will be final and permanent upon Assyria. The images we get of the catastrophe Assyria will suffer are most vivid and frank. Let's read Nahum chapter 3 together. Woe to the city of blood, steeped in lies, full of prey, with no end to the plunder. The crack of the whip, the rattle of the wheels, galloping horses, jolting chariots, cavalry charging, swords flashing, spears glittering, hosts of slain, heaps of bodies. There's no end of the corpses. They stumble over their corpses. Because of the continual whoring of this whore, this alluring mistress of sorcery, who sells nations with her whoring, families with her sorcery. I am against you, says Adonai Sabaoth. I will uncover your skirts on your face. I will show the nations your private parts and the kingdoms your shame. I will pelt you with disgusting filth, disgrace you, make a spectacle of you. Then all who see you will recoil from you. They will say, Nineveh is destroyed. Who will mourn for her? Where can I find people to comfort you? Are you any better than Nahum, located among the streams of the Nile, with water all around her to flood her wall of defense? Ethiopia and Egypt gave her boundless strength. Put and Luvim were there to help you. Still, she went captive into exile. Her infants torn to pieces at every street corner. Lots were drawn for her nobles. All her great men were bound in chains. You too, Nineveh, will be drunk. Your senses completely overcome. You too will seek a refuge from the enemy. All your fortifications will be like fig trees with early ripening figs. The moment they are shaken, they fall into the mouth of the eater. Look at your troops. They behave like women. Your country's gates are wide open to your foes. Fire has consumed their bars. Draw water for the siege. Strengthen your fortifications. Go down into the clay. Tread the mortar. Take hold of the mold for the bricks. There the fire will burn you up. The sword will cut you down. It will devour you like grasshoppers. Make yourselves as many as grasshoppers. Make yourselves as many as locusts. You had more merchants than stars in the sky. The locust sheds its skin and flies away. Your guards are like grasshoppers. Your marshals like swarms of locusts, which settle on the walls on a cold day. And when the sun rises, they fly away. They vanish to no one knows where. Your shepherds are slumbering, king of Asher. Your leaders are asleep. Your people are scattered all over the mountains with no one to round them up. Your wound can't be healed. Your injury is fatal. Everyone hearing the news about you will clap his hands in joy over you, for who has not been overwhelmed by your relentless cruelty? The first word to open this chapter is, most appropriately, woe. In Hebrew, hoi. Now, hoi is used in a couple of different ways in the Bible. It's used in funeral processions, especially by the paid mourners, as a lament. And it's used as an ominous cry of a realization that something bad is about to happen. Maybe something bad is already happening. In a message such as this one in Nahum, it is that of God's doom upon a people. So YHVH declares an epithet upon Nineveh. In his eyes, they are the city of bloodshed. That is, bloodshed is their identity. It's not just something they do. It's something they are. At least they are to God. And in the end, that's all that really matters. It is something all God worshipers need to take to heart, not just on a national scale, but a personal one as well. What is our identity before God? It is that which will determine our ultimate fate. And while I won't again quote the passage, one of the better places to see the same principle in action is Matthew chapter 7, when Yeshua warns that just because a person claims him, just because they claim to do good works in him, just because they attend services regularly and even seem like good people, that does not mean he acknowledges them. It comes down to a sincere mind that obeys what his Father commands. Those who do not do this, despite whatever they want to call themselves, are called lawless. And as a result, Yeshua says, I never knew you. Nineveh, Assyria, was lawless. Their identity was as lawless. They were full of lies. Thou shalt not lie. Full of robbery. Thou shalt not steal. They were a city of bloodshed. Thou shalt not murder. Here are three basic commandments of God that Nineveh not only disobeyed, but their practices grew to such a scope that it characterized their general behavior. And once a general behavior becomes a characterization of a group or a person, that becomes their identity. Actually, most English versions of verse 1 miss a vital point. The words that are usually translated as full of lies are in Hebrew kula hachash, which most literally means all of her a lie. That is, a person can be full of cancer, but obviously not every part of that person is cancerous, and therefore that person does not become a cancer as his or her identity. Rather, full of to us means lots, or it's spread. But all of means entirely or nearly entirely. That's what we must understand. All is a greater degree than full of, so these words are not synonyms. Nineveh had become a Sodom-like enemy of God. So they would suffer a Sodom-like destruction from which there would be no return. Now, the final part of verse 1 says that her prey never departs. The complete Jewish Bible is so far off the mark that it isn't helpful. However, her prey never departs is pretty awkward. It's hard to make sense of. Something like it, meaning Nineveh, is never without prey, is what it means. In an irony, Nineveh herself is about to become prey. The proud Ashurbanipal is recorded as saying, "The whole territory of my land in its entirety is filled to its farthest border with tribute and booty." Verses 2 and 3 imply, simply must be read together in order to have the full dramatic effect that is intended, and without doubt never should have been separated into two verses to begin with. And it reads, "The crack of the whip, the rattle of the wheels, galloping horses, jolting chariots, cavalry charging, swords flashing, spears glittering, hosts of slain, heaps of bodies. There's no end to the corpses. They stumble over their corpses." Now, while the complete Jewish Bible might not be the most literal, it does a very good job of translating this verse in a way discernible by Western ears and to help grasp the effect that Nahum is trying to achieve. We get this long series of abrupt staccato descriptions, sights and sounds of the scene inside of Nineveh as the battle for the city begins in earnest. All these things are happening at once. The sounds become mixed together in a violent symphony. It's chaotic. It's desperate. Reminds one so well of a passage from the Song of Deborah, where it speaks of the demise of Sisera in Judges 5:27. He sank down at her feet. He fell. He lay there. He sank at her feet. He fell. Where he sank down, there he fell dead. See, the Song of Deborah and Nahum are Hebrew poetry. And so the way accents are used along with these rapid-fire short phrases creates a mood and a tone to engross the hearer. It's the chaos of war. The graphic quality we see in Nahum's writing is gripping. Perhaps nothing in the entire Bible exceeds it. These are the sounds of battle in his era. For the civilians, it must have been terrifying. Nahum essentially positions himself as an eyewitness, an observer. He's watching all this happen, then reporting it like a war correspondent. It's interesting that we're going to find very similar wording and other parallels to what we're reading here in the book of Habakkuk, which again emphasizes the close interplay that many of these prophets had with one another, either in person or the later prophet borrowing from the writings of the earlier. Hosts of slain, heaps of bodies, Nahum reports. Clearly the enemy is now inside of Nineveh's walls. The living stumble over the dead and dying. As in Egypt, when God's wrath over that nation left nearly every home of the Egyptians with corpses, death was a veil, it was a fog that covered wherever one stood. Let's not get caught up in what Babylon was doing to Assyria. See, this is God exercising his wrath using Babylon as his instrument. The death sentence he passed upon Assyria was inescapable. Would not the wise person see the folly and pain that is happening because of resistance to God's will and his deliverance? And yet it happens this way to this day. And the vast majority of the world's population and their nations set themselves up for just this scenario. I mean, listen to Revelation speak of the repeat of what we're reading here. Revelation 9:20 and 21. Now the rest of mankind, those who were not killed by these plagues, even then didn't turn from what they had made with their own hands. They did not stop worshiping demons and idols made of gold, silver, bronze, stone, and wood, which can't see or hear or walk, nor did they turn from their murdering, their involvement with the occult and with drugs, their sexual immorality or their stealing. Verses 4 and 5. It's another pairing that should have remained as one verse. Reading the first without the second just interrupts the scene. Nahum 3, verses 4 and 5. Because of the continual whoring of this whore, this alluring mistress of sorcery who sells nations with her whoring and families with her sorcery, I am against you, says YHVH Zebaoth. I will uncover your skirts on your face. I will show the nations your private parts and the kingdoms of your shame. Here, Nineveh is characterized as a zonah, a prostitute, a whore. This glorious and sparkling city is being compared to a seductive harlot. She dazzled, drew in the unsuspecting. Nations wanted what Nineveh offered, just as men offer what the whore offered. Not all the nations of the Syrian Empire were taken by force. Some were glad to become allies and part of the empire because of what seemed like the best path to advance themselves. But this treacherous friendship Assyria offered was a mirage, like a lying politician seeking votes. The implications and promises of being attached to them were like fresh bait. The smaller nations were happy to bite at it. Again, in the end times, we will encounter the same situation. So, the Bible uses the same sort of characterizations of the evil that is perpetrating such infidelity towards God. Revelation starting in 17:1. Then came one of the angels with the 7 bowls, and he said to me, Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is sitting by many waters. The kings of the earth went whoring with her, and the people living on earth had become drunk from the wine of her whoring. He carried me off in the spirit to a desert. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, filled with blasphemous names and having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and glittered with gold and precious stones and pearls. And in her hand was a gold cup filled with the obscene, the filthy things produced by her whoring. On her forehead was written a name with a hidden meaning: Babel the Great, mother of whores and of earth's obscenities. Nineveh was the named personification of evil in Nahum's day. Babel, or Babylon, is the name personifying the same thing in the end times. Thus, both are called whores. Assyria and Babel are successful at first because they're so alluring. They hide or they twist the truth. They don't express the truth. They are also as prostitutes because they're not faithful. Their love is bought and sold. And as concerns prostitutes that are sorcerers, they're not faithful to God. Rather, they turn to a different master using their witchcraft. It's that other master that has given them their wealth and their power in exchange for their loyalty to him. And then as others see it, they rationalize it, they adopt it themselves, hoping to achieve the same results. As Hitzig said a long time ago, the word for the sorcery that is used by Nineveh is in Hebrew, kashapim. It means secret wiles, which, like magical arts, do not come to light in themselves, but only in their effects. You know, it's interesting. Evil in the form of sin is, as often as not, beautiful to look at. It can bring instant gratification. Yes, evil can win battles. Wickedness can lead to riches and advantages. Agreeing to give in to these sinful things can often bring great pleasure. If it did otherwise, people wouldn't be so prone to do it. In Western society, the most godless, immoral people can be the most admired if they're supremely wealthy or popular. The wicked prosperity doctrine that drives some church branches is indeed that alluring harlot, which claims that the wealthier a person is, it must be the measure of how godly they are, because God has blessed them with such material riches proportionally to the faith in him. Let's do what they do, since we want what they have. In reality, according to the scriptures, those who chase after such a path are harlots themselves, because they cannot also be faithful to God at the same time. Matthew 6:24, no one can be a slave to two masters. For he will either hate the first and love the second, or scorn the second and be loyal to the first. You can't be a slave to both God and money. God's position on these whoring nations, groups, and individuals begins in verse 5. I am against you. The first word is hine, which means behold or indeed. It's an expression that here means pay attention. I am against you is immediately followed by who this I is. It's YHVH of hosts. The Hebrew tsevaot translates to hosts. It's meant in the military holy war sense. We actually find this term first used in the Bible in 1 Samuel. And in Joshua, we find special reference to Tzivah, who's the commander of the army of YHVH. Joshua 5, starting at verse 13. One day when Joshua was there by Jericho, he raised his eyes and he looked, and in front of him stood a man with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went over to him and asked, are you on our side or on the side of the enemies? No, he replied, but I am the commander of YHVH's army, and I have come just now. Joshua fell on his face to the ground and worshipped him, and then asked, what does my Lord have to say to his servant? The commander of Jehovah's army answered Joshua, "Take your sandals off your feet because the place where you're standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Thus the prophet adds the element now of the cosmic powers to what's happening with Nineveh. In holy war, the army of heaven, warrior angels, are involved, along with those humans on earth who are fighting on the side of God and his battle with the enemy. And holy war is always about Israel in both the historical and the spiritual realms. Notice, going back to the very beginning of Nahum, that over and over, God invokes the personal pronoun I to emphasize his direct involvement. Now, when we read that I, Yehovah, will uncover your skirts, it is not uncovering on your face, as the complete Jewish Bible has it, but rather over your face. Okay, this is an ancient Middle Eastern expression that is about shame. So this is just what it sounds like. Nineveh, personified as a female, will have her skirt pulled up over her head by God. Therefore, it's not the skirt that's being uncovered, nor is it the face being covered over by the skirt, but rather it's about what's under the skirt. To have one's private parts be exposed by pulling up the skirt is really the closer meaning of the term nakedness in the Bible. That is what Adam and Eve each had covered over in the Garden of Eden by God when their sin opened their eyes such that they realized they were naked. So God made coverings for them to hide their private parts. And we must attempt to grasp the strong negative status of shame in those types of shame and honor societies, of which virtually all societies in Nahum's day were. See, shame is an intolerable social status. Shame is the worst of the worst. It does not mean to be ashamed, which is only expresses an emotional reaction, mostly about guilt. A person in the status of shame is shunned by people. That shamed person contaminates their entire family with shame. Thus, parents would even kill their own children, usually daughters, if the daughter caused the social status of shame upon herself. The word guilt plays no role in the matter of shame. You know, it's hard for people in the West to understand this. But shame and honor are the underlying basis of society for most of the Arab world today, especially for the Arab Muslim world. So what God is doing here is to put shame on Assyria. Now, one of the things that's so fascinating about this is that ever since Israel came back as a nation in 1948, and as small as they are, they have fended off the entire Muslim and Arab world, even winning territory from Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, such that those people they keep defeating speak of this as catastrophe. They call it Nakba. And for these people and nations, the catastrophe is that they have felt themselves personally and nationally shamed. And that is one of the main reasons for their never-ending war against Israel. Until they defeat Israel, they will, in their own eyes, remain in a condition of shame which they cannot tolerate. I hope this helps you to understand the enormity of what we are reading here in Nahum about uncovering your skirt. The people of Nahum's day would have gasped in horror at this. It's not just about Assyria being defeated. It's about being plunged into a permanent condition of shame from which they cannot escape. And final words of chapter 3, verse 5 verify what I just told you when it says, I will show the nations your private parts and the kingdoms your shame. Now, obviously, the pulling up the skirt and showing the private parts is but a Middle Eastern expression. It's not literal. And since God is a God of patterns, then his treatment of Assyria is not unique. When we read Isaiah about the future of Babylon, and for now, this was a historical happening that will happen again in the end times, strikingly similar words are used. Isaiah 47, starting at verse 1. Come down and sit in the dust, you virgin daughter of Babel. Sit on the ground, not on the throne, daughter of the Kasdim. No longer are you to be called dainty and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal. Take off your veil. Strip off your skirt. Uncover your legs. Wade through the streams. Your private parts will be exposed. Yes, your shame will be seen. I am going to take vengeance and no one will stand in my way. So in the end, the way God sees this matter of Assyria, Babylon, all of God's national enemies is that they are committing harlotry. And the harlotry is at least partly to do with their idolatry. Harlotry and idolatry go hand in hand. Thus, God classifies such nations, and on occasion individuals, as zona, prostitutes. Okay, Nahum, verse 3, 6, and 7. I will pelt you with disgusting filth, disgrace you, make a spectacle of you. Then all who see you will recoil from you. They will say, Nineveh is destroyed. Who will mourn for her? Where can I find people to comfort you? Now, I just read two verses together because they were meant to be read that way. There's no credible reason to divide this long statement into halves and assign each a verse number. They are to be coupled together for the sake of context. Notice again the use of the word I when the words are coming from God. That is, he personally will cause this pelting of Assyria with filth. Okay, let's talk for a moment about the Hebrew word that is commonly translated as filth. The word in the form that it's used here in Nahum is siqqusim. And for those who are reading this, please note that I've added the letter H in parentheses after the S for this word and did so for a couple of other words today. Okay. The H or the hey in Hebrew isn't there. Rather, I'm simply demonstrating that the letter S is pronounced in two different ways in Hebrew. Each has its own meaning. Okay, sometimes the S is just the simple, typical English way of saying S, as in the words Sam or sod or super. This reflects the Hebrew letter called sin. On the other hand, the exact same Hebrew letter can be pronounced like sh, sh, sh in English. For instance, as in the word she, shop, shoot. And when it is meant to be vocalized like this, the letter is called a sheen. The difference is important because how that letter is vocalized makes a big difference in what that word means. I won't be doing this too many times, only as a teaching point and a reminder, as well as an explanation of why I will vocalize an S word a certain way at any given time. Now, siqqusim is meant to be associated with paganism. It's used in a few different ways in the Old Testament, but it always has to do with something YHVH views as an abomination before him. It can also be used directly as meaning excrement, animal or human. But keep in mind, the word, when translated into filth, doesn't mean it like, I don't know, when you were young, having been playing outside, you come running into the house and your mother tells you to take a bath because you're filthy. In the West, filthy can more often does mean you have dirt or grease or some typical natural substance on you that needs to be washed off. It can also mean something that is immoral or disgusting to us. That's not how the Bible means it. Therefore, as concerns God and the Hebrews, when this word is used, it adds the element of being ritually unclean. This makes it a strong word with a spiritual element to it. Next, when the verse says that I will make a spectacle of you, it is in relation to exposing Assyria's shame. That is, Assyria won't be able to hide it. Rather, it will become known everywhere because God is going to make sure that it does. In verse 7, the gist of it is this: the entire world will be shocked, not disgusted, at what Assyria has become. The thought behind "then all who see you will recoil from you" is the ironic reversal of Assyria's fortunes. At one time, all who saw Assyria fled from them out of fear. Now the same who fled from fear will flee them in the sense of shunning something that disgusts them. No one associates with the person that is shamed. Assyria as a nation, having been shamed, brings on the equivalent reaction from its neighbors. And as a side note, this is only the third time in the book of Nahum that the word Nineveh has been explicitly used. Rather, all other references to Nineveh are implied. So some Bible versions just add the word. The reality is that since Nineveh actually stands for the Assyrian Empire, then any reference or implication to Assyria or Nineveh is speaking of the same thing. Now, this is pretty common in the Holy Scriptures, whether they were written in prose or poetry. Now, in retrospect, we also see that Assyria and Nineveh have turned into inherently negative terms. There's nothing good or moral to say about them. The same thing will eventually happen to Babylon. And even though centuries will pass after the rise and the fall of the Babylonian Empire, even late into the New Testament, the sheer mention of Babylon is meant to be purely negative. Nothing else needs to be added to the words Assyria, Nineveh, or Babylon to explain that these are negative terms, because there's nothing positive to say about them. They personify evil, Belial, in every instance. Well, the second half of verse 7 asks the rather rhetorical question of who will mourn for Nineveh's destruction, who will offer Nineveh comfort. The expected answer is, of course, no one. The meaning is so self-explanatory that I don't need to spend any more time with it. See, here's the thing. Nineveh and Assyria seem to be beyond touchable by any human terms. No nation seemed to be powerful enough to resist her aggression and control. Egypt managed to make some gains far to the south, but not for long. Babylon also resisted Assyria and had limited success, but then God stepped in. He put Assyria on trial, judged her as guilty, the sentence was death. You know, I ran across an old prayer by John Calvin that must be aimed at leadership. After reading Nahum to this point, there's a great lesson to be learned. It's a great principle to be embraced. So whatever position of leadership you may hold, family, business, congregation, government, this is for you. Here's the prayer. Grant, Almighty God, that as we have now heard of punishments so dreadful denounced on all tyrants and plunderers, that this warning may keep us within the limits of justice, so that none of us may abuse our power to oppress the innocent, but on the contrary, strive to benefit one another and wholly regulate ourselves according to the rule of equity. Every leader ought to memorize that. And as we move on to verse 8, the Egyptian city of Nahum is used as an example. Nahum 3:8. Are you any better than Nahum, located among the streams of the Nile, with water all around her, the flood her wall of defense? Look, I'm just going to spend just a moment to speak again about the structure of the next few verses that can only be seen in their original Hebrew form. Now, I do this to keep at the forefront of your minds that we are dealing throughout Nahum with Hebrew poetry. There are nuances to it that only in fairly recent times have they even been discovered. We first delved into this in the introduction to Nahum, so now here is yet another uniquely Hebrew aspect to it. Verses 3 through 8 form a canto. That is, it's a unified section of this poem. Structurally, it is presented in what can be called a menorah pattern. Okay. That is, there are 7 lines of poetry that revolve around a center point, a 3-1-3 arrangement, with the 1 being the center point, then 3 lines on each side of it. So for the sake of demonstration and clarity, I will use the way Dwayne Christensen presented it, as it is the easiest to see. I will just use the letters A, B, and C to denote a line of poetry on each side of the center point, then the letter X to identify the center point verse. So verse 8 is A. To Nineveh, are you better than Nahum on the Nile? Verse 9 is B. Nahum has a strong ally in Cush, who was her strength. Verse 10a is C. She went into captivity with her infants dashed into pieces. Verse 10b is the X, the center point. The leaders of Nahum were carried away in chains. Verse 11 is C prime. Nineveh is addressed, you will become drunk and seek refuge. Verse 12 is B prime. Your fortresses will fall like first ripe figs to be eaten. Verse 13 is A prime. To Nineveh, look at your people, they're like women. See, here's the thing, okay? Clearly, this structure is meant to gain the attention of the Israelites by using a structural pattern that mimics the branch pattern of the temple menorah. Why? Because as much as this is all about Nineveh and the Assyrians' absolute destruction, at the same time, it's a great encouragement to the people of Judah. Do not think this changes the meaning if we don't see this pattern. However, it certainly does change the emphasis, and it highlights the benefactors of God's actions. It's my opinion that in our end times future, we will see this same pattern played out, but with different names assigned. That is, as in the opening line, A, we could say, to the nations, are you better than Babylon? Then B, Babylon had a strong ally in the Medes, who was her strength. C, Babylon went into captivity with her infants dashed into pieces. X, the center point, the leaders of the nations were put into chains and carried away, and so on. This will only mean something to God's worshipers, and only when we're made aware of it. We can depend upon God and upon his patterns to explain what is and what is coming. And poetic structures like Nahum's can impress upon us that all is going to be done for the sake of Israel. As Paul said in Romans 11, starting at verse 25, "For brothers, I want you to understand this truth, which God formerly concealed, but has now revealed, so that you won't imagine you know more than you actually do. It is that stoniness to a degree has come upon Israel until the Gentile world enters its fullness, and it's in this way that all Israel will be saved. As the Tanakh says, out of Zion will come the Redeemer, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob, and this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins." Truthfully, there's even more amazing structure to verses 8 through 13, which I'll let you explore on your own if you'd like to. Very briefly, it is that there is also an inherent pattern in the way the Hebrew is vocalized in poetry. It's called SAS units. That is syntactical accent stress. Terrible name. But all it really means is how many syllables are accented within a word or a phrase. So in Nahum's super complex poetry, it was constructed also employing a system of adding up the number of accented syllables that exist in a line of poetry, then creating a recognizable pattern out of it. And amazingly, the SAS pattern also is absolutely perfect in this menorah pattern of verses 8 through 13. So those who have scoffed in the past and who still do at the reality of how Hebrew poetry is structured need to think again. It matters in proper Bible understanding, interpretation, instruction. Now, the city of Nahum was later named to Thebes. Today it's called Luxor. It lies along the Nile River. I've had the privilege to visit this place. It is one of the most impressive ruins I have ever seen. This verse opens with a question. Are you, Nineveh, better than Nahum? To be more succinct in what it is asking, it probably ought to be worded, are you superior to Nahum? Now, it feels like a rhetorical question that is to be answered with a yes or a no, but we can't really do that here. Okay. See, in one sense, the answer could be yes, because indeed Assyria defeated Nahum and brought it into a serious sphere of influence. But in another sense, the answer is no, because Assyria is going to suffer the same fate as Nahum. So in the end, we can best understand the point of this short question as, will you, Nineveh, have a better fate than Nahum? Now, interestingly, the city name of Nahum means the city of the god Ammon. And the meaning of the name Assyria is the people of the god Asher. So the names of these two places are both directly tied to pagan gods. Not surprisingly, we find YHVH defeating those two gods and the cities and nations named for them. Equally not surprising, we find the matter of water as a protective defensive barrier for both Nineveh and for Nahum. Yet in the end, that water didn't save either of them. So for the prophet's words to use Nahum as the foil in this poem fits about as perfectly as it gets. This is merely highlighted with the final words of verse 8, located among the streams of the Nile with water all around her, her flood, her wall of defense. Okay, here's what we'll conclude today's lesson with. Those who do not learn from history are destined to repeat it. Do you struggle with a lack of humility? So it seems God's always humbling you. Then you haven't yet learned the lesson. Do national leaders think the measure of their nation is mostly about wealth and the size of their military? They haven't yet learned the lesson that this is not enough. Justice and morality are even more important. Clearly, the Assyrians were so high and mighty, they had yet to learn the lessons of history, just as Nahum had not. Therefore, they would share the consequences of their pride, making them unteachable.
For more teachings of real Bible study and to rediscover God's Word with Tom Bradford, visit Torah Class today on the web, streaming TV, or download the Torah Class mobile app.